Hey guys, welcome back to the Casual NBA Fanatic Podcast. We're now a few weeks into the season and there's already a lot to unpack. So in today's episode, I'm going to be diving into two segments. So I'm going to go for it like a deep breakdown into Victor Wembanyama. And for Victor, it's going to be not just about the scoring or the box score stuff that he brings to the table that has absolutely bewildered the entire NBA media, but more just going into the actual impact that he's having across the league. From defensive gravity to how teams are actually scheming around him and the value that that has on his specific team. And then I'll shift into my top 5 MVP race so far, just basically breaking down who's separating themselves early, who's flying under the radar, and which performances are setting the tone for the season ahead. And so with that, let's get into it with the Victor Wembanyama segment here. And so with Victor, it's all about his external impact that we're going to go into it here. He's obviously had struggles with the high-pressure double-teaming defenses in the past few weeks, and that is absolutely been on display. And these defenses are absolutely geared towards denying those catches below the elbows, like we saw that specifically in the Lakers matchup, where you can actually get under his lack of base strength. And just the gap between Victor and truly dominant offensive bigs like Nikola Jokic, Alperen Şengün, even Joel Embiid, like the main gap between those guys is that he just doesn't possess the strength to both battle for positioning, but also the strength to be able to make those reads through contact and traffic. And that has been the big thing for Victor to have to go through. And that's his real next challenge that he has to face as he does try to climb the ladder as the best player in the world. But as Victor does continue to build out the frame, and specifically his balance and his overall court mapping as an advantage creator, I think obviously Victor has struggled to be this overpowered offensive fulcrum since week 1. And what we saw from week 1 was an absolute revelation, but he's been finding it harder to replicate that. And, in that first week, he was just purely dissecting teams with the one-on-one advantages that he was given before these geared on coverages started to come on. But I think there's an underrated element that is occurring here. And especially for Wemby, as we do view him as one of the top tier superstars in our league. Someone who is ascending towards that top 5 megastar echelon. And for me, I think we've got to start appreciating the external impact that can get overlooked by sometimes, the questionable shot charts, the lowlights of him getting, brutally stripped by guards, or the frequent struggles making clean reads within those swarming, defensive coverages in the paint. Offensively, in terms of being that offensive fulcrum for San Antonio, Victor is legitimately exceptional when it comes to literal advantage creating right now. Yes, he can struggle to capitalize on the gaps that he creates with his gravity, like those passing gaps and those passing lanes, especially as teams vary their help angles from different sides of the floor. And, they vary the assigned matchups that they'll throw at him and just the overall coverage. But that is what happens when you're a 21-year-old, 7'5" center prospect who is truly looking to refine his scoring skill set. And that floor processing, that stuff will all come to him extremely fast, especially with the Spurs development and with all the high IQ and extremely committed role player foundation that they've surrounded him with. But also just the growing pains that we're seeing over in terms of just the passing field. It's just part of the process. And so yes, it's fun to push Victor into these definite top 5 discussions. It is fun, but the on-ball value does take time to fully cement him into that true matchup resilient territory. He's not there yet. He's not at the Jokic, Luka Doncic, SGA offensive level just yet, despite what some box numbers will be able to say, and the overall skill and ceiling that this guy can reach. But it is slowly and steadily getting there as he does understand how to actually manage games at one of the highest levels. And so when assessing what Victor does outside of just purely the on-ball stuff, when he is terrorizing teams with those elite one-on-one advantages that he always has against really anyone in the league, it kind of starts with the same thing as every superstar, and that is gravity. So obviously for Victor, his gravity is scaled just so drastically, and it's really just because of the ability that he has to actually just move at the highest level of anyone to ever grace his size. And that makes him just a staggering matchup problem on the floor at all times. And Wemby's movement is what literally contorts defensive structures. And he just causes a ton of miscommunication just by simply cutting, by rolling into the floor, by trying to set up on the offensive glass. And just Victor legit just presenting for the ball out of the paint alters how teams execute, their zone coverages that they'll try frequently throw at San Antonio. And it's because you have to stay completely and utterly attached to the hip at all times to deny Wemby that positioning and the comfortable catches that he wants. Because literally the whole game plan at this point in time is to make Wemby physically uncomfortable. And though it has worked relatively well for teams to, limit his comfort and the on-ball impact that he has on games, what can get overlooked is just how that level of attention directly creates tons of cutting openings, advantageous closeout attacking opportunities for all the guys on the roster. Like, we've seen how guys like Devin Vassell, Steph Castle, Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson, so on, all these guys have been able to capitalize with just their play finishing strengths. Wemby's at that level where he can be surrounded by guys who aren't, totally exceptional star talent types of guys. He just needs guys that can play in these achievable roles. And that's what San Antonio has found success in so far this year, just playing off Wemby's insane gravity levels. And so just the literal value of Wemby's movement, just with the way that teams are trying to guard him, is just something that is getting hard to comprehend, especially with how young he is, especially when he also has these questionable games as well. But with the massive reduction that we've seen in just Wemby's shot settling, just the maturity boost matched with the gravity that he is causing, like, it's why we are inherently already viewing this guy as a top 5 player in the league, just of what we've seen so far this year. And obviously it's great to see the skill improvements, but sometimes we can actually forget just how that can intertwine into a megastar's floor gravity. And that is arguably the most valuable offensive trait for a team's designated offensive star. Think Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, the actual gravity that they bring and how that impacts the actual process of a team's offense. And adding to that as well, Wemby's role in screen gravity is just an absolute confidence-boosting pill for any one of his ball handlers. Why do you think Steph Castle is looking like so effortlessly composed as a second-year ball handler, someone with a pretty raw skill set as it is? And it's because really just that comfort and the added attention geared towards limiting that pocket pass and the over-the-top pick and roll reads to wherever Victor ends up. The miscommunication that causes, that is versatile, the popping and the rolling, the actual breakdowns that causes, that gives guys just way more time to actually process the floor. Obviously, Steph Castle's an exceptional passing talent, but that gravity just opens up so much more time and just makes everything so much more luxurious for the ball handlers to actually develop extremely comfortably. In terms of also more into the external impact, transition as well. The Spurs love having their raw, skilled young guys flourish in the open floor, just flexing that physical athleticism. But Victor Wembanyama, just his actual build, it enables them to actually kickstart their transition opportunities just so powerfully. And I'm not really talking about Victor's ability to make any sort of break start passing, but it's just more of his all-time rim protection directly at the rim and just the defensive playmaking that gets his athletes out running and enables the Spurs to actually milk the margins. And it's why they've been such a good regular season team. Adding to the transition, also just the direct foot speed that Wemby brings at his size. Wemby theoretically just fuels transition cross matches for his team just with his overall foot speed advantages that he has against other bigs. And, add in those fast drag screen actions and the trailer possessions, the trailer possession runways that he can get as well. You just have such a top-tier, high-pace offensive fulcrum for the modern NBA. This guy is absolutely overpowered right now for how we look at the landscape for the future of the NBA to go. And I think just sometimes we get greedy, regardless of future expectations. Wemby is legit just 21 years old, and we can go on and on about the defensive presence and the value of that alone, but the offensive presence right now is why there is just such a massive discrepancy with the Spurs offense with him on and off the floor, despite him not being, overly polished or overly dominant as an offensive decision maker just yet. And he's not that half-court surgeon that Jokic is yet, and the other guys at the top of the league, but he is slowly and steadily getting there. And I just think we have to start appreciating his actual value on the offensive end, especially on those possessions where he doesn't touch the ball. Now, moving on to my MVP race. I've got 5 guys, and to be honest, just a quick disclaimer, it's all pretty much what you guys would expect. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this aligns with what the actual MVP race ladder was at the moment, to be honest. But at number 1, we're just going to quickly hit these guys off. I've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as my leading MVP candidate to start the year. Now, SGA has been absolutely phenomenal recently, and I just think the reason why I have him one is just that combination of the all-out reliance that the Thunder have had on SGA, but also just the overall record. Like, it just speaks for itself and why he does rank so high. I mean, SGA is legitimately the most consistent scoring force, and he's just so transcendent as a scorer. And that value on the floor for his team at this point in time, it's just so elite, and it's just so majorly valuable for what OKC need. A team that's obviously prioritized and geared around getting defensive stops, but a team, especially with J-Dub out and like with Chet, missing a few games here and there. Obviously, it's been a small starting sample size that we've been given, but OKC has been so reliant on SGA's ability to just float that half-court offense just with his elite shot creation through 48 minutes, which is just so highly conditioned at this point in time. And the argument for SGA, I mean, a lot of it is narrative-driven as well. I know he won the MVP last year, but then again, for Shai, his value just generally get really underrated, I think, in this day and age. Like, I think we're actually becoming a little bit unappreciative of what, like, the actual scorer archetype can bring to the NBA today and the value that has when you are so transcendently great at it. And obviously, he doesn't have the same stellar passing numbers that guys like Luka have and Jokic. He doesn't have the exceptional perimeter off-ball value. He doesn't have the same insane physically dominant resilience as those guys. But Shai's consistency and the ability to generate super high-quality looks as a top 3 in both ISO and pick-and-roll volume in the NBA, it's just something that is really hard for just stat watchers and analytic-driven fans to appreciate as much. And then also, when you're watching OKC's offense, especially like that clutch time offense, the reliance is just so staggering on SGA. And I think, to me, that just gives him a bump when evaluating the value that he brings to a team that is winning so much right now. They're the best team in the league. They might be on pace for a 70-win season. And despite having all these stars, and who I think J-Dub are knocking on the door superstar, without even having him grace the floor so far this year, and what this guy's been able to do, at the moment, SGA scoring an unbelievable 1.21 points per possession out of pick and rolls, which out of 32 guys to run 50 or more pick and rolls, that ranks second only to Austin Reeves, who's only run 83 to SGA's 136. And so just the luxury to rely on that magnitude of self-creation, that just alleviates much on the coaching staff and also just the talent that OKC have missed to start their year. And it's why I do have SGA as the MVP frontrunner to start the season. Now, next up, number 2, I've got Giannis Antetokounmpo still here by a slight shred. Now, Giannis does land here simply because of, partially what I spoke about with the SGA argument, and it's just the load, the reliance, and the value placed upon Giannis, considering the personnel gaps in Milwaukee, plus also just the relative success that they've seen, and they've been one of the premier teams out in the weak East. And to be honest, to me, that's pretty astronomical, to be honest, like considering what their roster was looking like coming into the season. And for Giannis, like, it's not just the box score numbers that encapsulate this, but they definitely start really well for his argument. 33 points, 12 rebounds, and 6 assists on 65% effective field goal percentage, as he literally just commands both ends of the floor for a top-tier regular season team to start the year. That is the ultimate argument. And so Giannis's literal impact does the explanation as well. Like, we're talking about gravity off the ball. We're talking about his ability, like the actual ability of Giannis just to move and pose such a staggering threat, just with the impeccable catch radius, the finishing inevitability anywhere within that 8 feet of the rim section. That just places him above guys like Wemby and Jokic as threats catching out of the post. Giannis, his screening value, the roll man athleticism, the peak physical advantage creation, they have all been such a major catalyst for Milwaukee getting over the underwhelming roster that they've thrown out to start the year. And even on those off games, Giannis just finds a way to assert himself as the best player in the NBA at contributing on the margins. We're talking about one of the best rebounders in the NBA. We're talking about the best downhill forceful pressure in the NBA, the best kick-out creating passer that we have, and just the value that Giannis brings in transition. We're talking about the value he brings on the offensive glass as a cutter, as a vertical threat. They just add to the game-to-game package that the Bucks have gotten out of Giannis every game. And just with the skill refinements, the overall offensive maturity as well with Giannis. Also just, we're talking about a guy who's bumping up his defensive intensity and load this year. I think it's pretty clear that to start the season, Giannis deserves to be respected this greatly, and I think he is the second leading MVP candidate to start the year. Now, moving on to number 3, I've got Nikola Jokic landing here, and look, with Jokic, I think it's becoming really, really hard to actually comprehend what this guy is doing on a night-to-night basis. But it's also not just that. I mean, it's also just the resilience year by year, and like literally this guy at the moment, he just came off and he's adding to it now, but he just came off one of the greatest individual 5-year runs that we've ever seen from any player in NBA history, and he's about to add a 6th dominant year on top of that. He's already off to a great start with Denver. I mean, they're 9-2 to start the year, and Jokic may well and truly be on his second year averaging a triple-double, and he started the year averaging 29, 13, and 11 on a staggering 74% effective field goal percentage, on his way to his most efficient season of all time and what may be the most efficient all-time season that we've ever seen if he continues to do so. Obviously, small sample size, but the guy looks absolutely dominant once again. And he's doing this in under 34 minutes a game, and he's also quarterbacking the expected top 3 half-court offense in the league that we thought they were going to be, and the second best offense in basketball, just with his pristine blend as the most dominant scorer and the outright best passer in the NBA for just another year. And just to harp more on the shooting efficiency metrics, which are numbers that are just far too transcendent and mind-blowing to just pass up on, this guy's making 87% of his looks in the restricted area. He's making 70% of his looks in the paint non-restricted area. He's making 71% on all hook shots, 78% on layups. He's 9 for 11 from the mid-range, and he's 44% on catch and shoot threes. And that's the aspect that's also just slowly climbing back to that pinnacle efficiency that we saw last year. And I'd honestly say you should replay those stats once again. But these numbers are coming from a guy that did start off relatively passive to start the year, and it's just unbelievable to see this once again. And just for the fact that historically as well, like Jokic is the best floor and ceiling raiser in basketball. And I think the great start for Denver as well, that just helps give Jokic this great ground as a top 3 MVP candidate to start the year. And really, I just think the reliance, the floor-raising efforts from both SGA and Giannis, that's the only reason why I do think their cases might be a little bit stronger at the moment, especially when we are reviewing from the MVP argument context. But Jokic was my preseason pick, and I'm very content with how dominant he's been to start the year. And I think he will climb to the top, especially with how dominant Denver look to actually separate themselves from teams like Milwaukee this year. And I think that will give him the leg up in those future arguments. Now, number 4, this is a guy that I wanted to pitch at number 3 so desperately, but the on-ball gap and the resilience gap is very different. And obviously we spoke about him before, and that is Victor Wembanyama. I think Victor Wembanyama is still pretty clearly in this top 5 zone. Like when we are talking about impact and like what you mean to your team. And I think he pretty effortlessly slots into this look. After about 3 weeks in, Victor has still killed it impact-wise. And obviously, despite the drop in production numbers and the drop in half-court scoring efficiency, we know, though, that this drop was obviously bound to occur at some point. And it's really just because Wemby is already heading into that top 5 status in the league, and he's earning that respect from defenses. And with all the improvements that we've seen in his individual offensive game, from the skill refinements to the shot selection and maturity to the movement fluidity. But the thing is, though, with how great Wemby has been able to weaponize himself as a truly exceptional half-court offensive fulcrum, he now has to pass the next test as a true megastar talent, and that is to compete for a championship. And he's on the way. Like he's got to pass the same test that we saw Shai only pass last season, and that is just the game management piece. Becoming a more surgical player, basically. And these are the starting stages for Wemby to learn how to deal with these desperate defensive coverages, whose only aim is to really just force rush decisions for a guy who naturally lacks the ability to make these super high rewarding reads. And that really, again, like I said before, purely lacks due to the lack of base strength and the fact that, this guy has been playing center in the anchor position his entire career. Like, it's very foreign to him. But so far, the gravity and the impact that Wemby's offering to that Spurs system is absolutely astronomical. I already spoke about it before, so I'm not going to harp on it too much. But Wemby's value on the floor is just it's such a ceiling-raising feature to a team. And the amount of space, lanes, runways, open slots, that he's like the amount that he actually opens up through his cutting and rolling and the catches, it just gives him this already major baseline to a team. And it's why we've seen guys like Steph Castle, Julian Champagnie, Keldon Johnson, and so on have extremely productive and impactful time as play finishers and scorers. And it's basically off that gravity piece like we spoke about in that breakdown before. And then also to add in the fact that he's also just the best defensive player on the planet. And to me, that makes up the argument as he does captain the 2-seeded, or I think top 3-seeded Spurs at this point in time. And I think Wemby's reached this stage where we can now regard him as the best pure two-way player in basketball. And for me, that's in the sense that his value on both ends of the floor is equally as dramatic and dominant. And it's a title that, I regarded Anthony Davis as, for years now. But I just think Wemby has clearly made that next step as a stable offensive fulcrum. And I think it's pretty clear of his MVP case so far. I mean, I think he's a top 4 MVP candidate, simple as that. I think he's absolutely launched himself in direct company with the true megastars of the NBA. Now, moving on to number 5. My last pick today, we're staying on the pretty obvious side of things. It's going to stay that way, and I've got Luka Doncic here that lands at number 5. So basically, we're just sticking with the trend of individual dominance matched with, general team success compared to both expectations and just general personnel. And for me, the work that Luka has done in his 8 games with the Lakers this year has been enough to push him into this top 5 rank. They're 5-3 in those 8 games, but this guy's averaging 35, 9, and 9 on 55% effective field goal percentage. Obviously, the efficiency and stuff has told down recently. He had a pretty terrible game against that Oklahoma City defense. But he's doing all of this major production whilst reaching back to what I think is personally his best individual shape that we've seen him in his entire career. And for me, it's just a pure representation that Luka is rising to the occasion whilst also understanding what he individually needs from his body. Like, this whole shift has been absolutely exceptional to see from him as a competitor. And in terms of like the modern day pace preference, I just think his body refinement over the past year has been absolutely exceptional. And that is why he is coming to this season absolutely dominating and not falling behind the curb. And just the extra burst that we're seeing with Luka, that just adds to the downhill pressure that he can continually thrust upon teams. And that extra burst that we've seen so far is just so easily translated in his ability to both generate lift and separation, which has clearly translated into his jump shot this entire season and the scorching start that we saw him have. And that has fully unlocked this full monster offensive magician that we're seeing once again. And so even though the Lakers aren't truly dominant to start the year by any means, I just think Luka's value to them has already been surely felt as that offensive wizard. And it's because when I'm talking about the value-wise, he's leading the Lakers, by far the Lakers' biggest strength, and that is their half-court offense. And so despite guys like, I know people might say, where's Cade Cunningham in these discussions in the top 5? I know obviously Cade's quarterbacking a better team, but I just give the nod to Luka for the exceptional excellence that he is putting up right now. And ultimately, probably Cade will bump into this spot if, for another week or two, Cade can actually still maintain that top seed. But at the moment, with just the few games that Luka has showed us, he's clearly a top 3 player on the planet. And so to wrap it up, today's episode, kind of just covered again at the start, you can get back to it again, but Wemby's already reshaping the league's landscape just with this unique archetype he's bringing. He's just something so rare and something that stands out much further than just a dominant box score. And I just think the external impact is something we have to start appreciating right now. And then also, as far as the MVP race goes, I just think the early leaderboard is pretty stacked. And I think it's really just a mix of just familiar names. I think just the league's absolute top-tier megastars are really starting to cement themselves as that international 5. And they hold my top 5 spots for the MVP so far this year. And so if you guys enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to follow the podcast and check out my Instagram at Casual NBA Fanatic. I upload daily clips, updates, and deep dives every single day. And so I appreciate you guys for all tuning in, and I hope you guys enjoy this next slate of basketball coming up with the in-season tournament heating up, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode.